Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello, everybody. My name is Minh, and I'm your host from NDIS Property Australia. And you listen to this, there has a podcast to show explains, highlights, guides, and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today, we have Kevin Chen from Paramount Disability Homes, a repeat guest speaker, one of our favourite speakers, I think. He's come with some information. He had a Paramount boys in Melbourne there had a meeting with the NDIA Commission in their office to talk about the SDA sector. And we're here to dissect and hear what Kevin and Jonathan and the boys in this office talked about with the NDIS. So, Kevin, welcome today.
Thank you for having me again. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Awesome, mate. Tell me what happened. How did this come about, this meeting, and why did it occur, and why did they single you guys out, and what did you guys talk about? So I'll just let you talk, and I'll jump in every once in a while to ask some questions here, please.
Oh, absolutely. So, look, we were approached by the NDIS Quality and Safety Commission, and they reached out to us originally because they wanted to get some feedback, I guess, on the SDA sort of overview on the market, what we were seeing as SDA providers firsthand, any sort of struggles that we were facing, obviously some feedback given the recent sort of few instances that happened in the media. I think they want to address the grey areas in this space. So, they were doing a handful of interviews. So they're actually up from Brisbane, and they came down here, did a fair few interviews with different providers, and we happened to be one of the providers that they talked to.
Wonderful. So let's start from the beginning. What did they ask you? What did you talk about? Tell me.
Yeah, so it's sort of the first thing they asked us is about what is it that we're seeing in the market, and what are the biggest sort of pitfalls that we're seeing in this current market. Obviously, the first thing we talked about is the undersupply of housing in the right areas, or where the populated areas for disabled participants. And then obviously the huge oversupply of housing in, areas that demand's not met. So that was one of the main issues. And obviously that issue itself has a lot of different issues that fall under. So whether that be SDA funding, whether that be issues with demand, data. There's a range of issues that we touched base on. And then they also addressed things like inducements. So inducements being offerings that SDA providers might give to participants. It's a very grey area, as you can probably imagine, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate in this space. And then we talked about certain ways that we can address these issues as well.
Kevin, my understanding is there's more inducements occurring in the SIL provider sector than the SDA provider market. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. So that was our initial sort of feedback as well. So I'll give you guys an example. It's quite standard in this market where SDA providers will offer, like a furnishing package, or I should say the investors behind the SDA providers are offering a furnishing package, might offer, transitional costs, might offer to cover, waive the maximum reasonable rental contribution for the first, period of time. And these are sort of the things where, they wanted to address whether it's appropriate or not and what's happening in the market. So we gave them our insights and the reasonings for these kind of offerings in this space. And do you want me to talk about what we shared with them in terms of our feedback?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I'm very curious because, from a commercial point of view, from an investor point of view, offering free furniture package or offering no MRRC for 6 months or 12 months or whatever, or offering transportation costs for moving over, that's just general stuff. I mean, that's not an inducement, I think. That's probably a little bit too, I'm not too worried about that, I guess. But I'm more I think we are all more curious as to know what things did you dig into the NDIS and give me your serious thoughts about, still SDA separation, compliance changes or whatnot. So the juicy stuff I want to hear about is why I'm recording this interview with you, Kevin,
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the main issues that I addressed to them, inducements was definitely not one of my main concerns because as you said, I probably wouldn't call it an inducement as well. But I think there's definitely a massive pitfall in their understanding on the SDA market because it's a privatization of the healthcare industry, right? So you come into the private sector to find investment. And obviously there's a lot of blind sides for them. What I mean by that is I'm not sure how well the NDIS understands, the process of borrowing, for example, to build an SDA or what's happening in the finance sector. So, as we're probably all aware, there's been, the tightening in the financing space, but there's still a huge undersupply of SDA homes in the right locations. And, it was a big shock to them as well. They didn't understand that, there are really tight financing issues. It's not just the fact that land is really expensive in infill areas. That's why investors can't invest in this area. So there's a lot of areas that they didn't, I guess, understand, and we had to shed light on.
So Kevin, I want to ask you a question. After this meeting you had with the NDIA Commission, I rang you the next day and you said to me that they were very surprised and with how advanced the SDA sector had become the last few years. Do you want to elaborate more on that topic, the impression there, please?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously this scheme is not been around for a long time. Obviously when it was designed, they didn't expect so many dwellings to obviously be built in a short period of time. And now obviously there's more sophisticated investors, developers, institutions that have jumped in to SDA and advancing sort of in this space. So obviously when they initially launched the scheme, they didn't know that probably in such a short period of time that there was going to be so much investment in this industry.
Okay. Thanks for that. What else did you glean from them? I mean, I know it's more about them coming to see you. Was it because of the Cocoon scandal fallout that they have initiated all these meetings with SDA providers? Is that the reason why this has occurred with most providers some providers out there?
I think so. So I think they want to improve the space. Obviously, they see certain areas that aren't safe in their eyes. So they want, the advice from SDA providers in this space to understand how they can redesign certain guidelines, for example. One thing that was really interesting actually is, a specialist disability accommodation team in the NDIA or NDIS, I should say, when we call or when we email them. So a lot of the times when we face gray areas in this space, we give them a call, but typically nothing really transcends through that call and we're asked to write an email. This might be issues with funding, issues with delays. And often the feedback that we get is not from a specialist team. It's from a general NDIA team. And we weren't quite happy about that, obviously, because we want to know the right answers. We've got stakeholders that we have to manage as well. So for us, we suggested that it would be really crucial and pivotal that we have like a specialist disability accommodation sector in the NDIA that can answer any of our queries as SDA providers. Obviously, this industry has grown very fast, so I don't think they've upscaled the staff as fast. And obviously, training staff is hard because it's a very niche space in this whole scheme there.
Kevin, the way you're talking to me gives us the impression that it's a very small SDA team in the NDIS, in the NDIA. Is that your impression, that the understaffed, under-resourced kind of thing?
Yeah, in my experience, I think they are definitely under-resourced and understaffed. Obviously, you can imagine with the volume of SDA properties that are coming out and claims that are being made, the delays are because, if it's plan managed or if it's NDI managed, for example, it's a lot of admin work and it doesn't seem like they have sufficient staff to handle, that increase in volume that we've seen. So definitely, I think if they direct resources in the right sector or give us a specialist team, it'd be beneficial to us and other providers and stakeholders, participants in the space,
Sure. Kevin, as a business, Paramount Disability Homes, have you encountered clunky red tape challenges in the processing administration of enrolments and enrolments, claiming funds for investors? Have you seen those challenges in that paperwork from your end?
Oh, most definitely. I mean,
Can you give us examples of those scenarios?
yeah, definitely. So, for example, like one of the first steps in SDA is to do the enrollment. So, an investor, they get all their certifications done, and then you submit the enrollment to the NDIA, sorry. And often there are things that might not be consistent with what they need. For example, a title is not the right one they're looking for. There might be inconsistencies in the certificates. The as-built certificate is different to something that's on a design certificate. The evacuation diagram's not accurate. But, and by that time, a participant's on the other side waiting to move into the property. And by the time that we submitted all these documents, it's already been a couple of weeks, and they come back to us and say, look, this is insufficient, and by the time we get those documents ready and submit it back, there's further processing. So there's further delays in just enrolling the property. So it should be a very simple, straightforward task. It shouldn't take 28 days to process, but it sometimes takes even longer than that.
Wow, yeah. I've heard some shock stories out there for sure. I want to go off track here. This is not relevant to your meeting, but I want to ask you this question. With funding for participants and housing, you might have a one-to-one SDA funding approval for a participant, but their SIL funding is 1-to-3 funding SIL funding. Yeah. Why do they do that? Is that common to see that? And how do you overcome that? 1-to-3 care funding, whereas 1-to-1 housing funding kind of thing?
Yeah, great question. So the reason that's quite common is because the SIL and SDA funding weren't approved at the same time. Okay. So they most likely would have put the SDA application in after they got the SIL funding. And obviously when you resubmit for a change or review on the plan, you have different sort of, different set of evidence. You might have used a different occupational therapist. You might have used a specialist support coordinator in that instance. So there's a lot of inconsistencies in plan, like you mentioned. So you might have, 1-to-3 SDA funding, but 1-to-1 care. So if you bring in another participant in the house, you need 2 support workers in the house. So that one support worker may not be able to look after someone that's 1-to-3 ratio because it takes away from the first participant. So
yeah, gotcha.
In those instances, what we do is we let the participants stay in the house, but we would probably put them in a appropriate setting. For example, an apartment, right? They get into an apartment, and then we resubmit a change of circumstances to update their SDA funding to match with their SIL funding.
Sure. Hey, back to the topic at hand. Did you talk much about Cocoon with the NDIA?
Oh, I mean, we didn't even name drop them, but I think it was quite, I think one of the main reasons they came to talk to us was because of that incident. They're realizing there's actually a lot of safety concerns in this sector, although it's very niche, and they've never really directed too much attention to the SDA sector. So it's always been sort of SIL or, support coordination, but SDA has never been their key focus. And it's good to see that they're sort of starting to dig in a little bit more in this sector. But yeah, I think it's definitely after that scenario.
Sure. Did they discuss any strategies or supports to address the current challenges with SDA vacancy rates and the funding complexities, especially for participants with the complex needs at all?
Well, I think to address vacancy rates, they simply don't really care. I mean, why should they care? I think, they all they can control is the funding that they provide to participants, and they obviously leave the choice and control up to the participants. But there were some suggestions that I made to them in terms of how we can incentivize, more supply in the right areas. And that's to increase funding for participants that want to live in.
Location factor?
Location factor is a big one. So, for example, if I've got SDA funding and, I've got 1-to-3 funding, if my funding's in Southeast, it'll be 50,000, for example. But if I go into Inner East, it's boosted to $90,000. So you've got to really give that flexibility and that you don't need to put a plan review in short. It doesn't make sense to go through a plan review just to boost the income based on where you live. And that way it can incentivize more builds in the right areas. Because, if we build a house today in Box Hill Tech, most people that will be applying will have funding that's in Southeast, which will never be sufficient for a build here, So I think one of the main areas to address is the location factor, boosting what's needed for the right investment to come, because it's simply too low. Most people have, further out funding. Yeah.
Speaking of funding, how about payments, pace, delays of payments? Did you guys talk about those delays?
I think that's common knowledge. It's too big of a.
But the biggest challenge in the SDA sector is the slow payments for SDA payments to enrolled houses with participants in there. I mean, I understand them betting, going through auditing invoices, taking 90 days or whatnot. I understand that, but this is SDA. It should be automatic. Why are so many investors getting such big delays or payments for rent?
Yeah, great question. I think it comes down to whether it's NDIA managed, whether it's self-managed, whether it's plan managed. Because there's so many inconsistencies. For example, if a plan manager, which means that they've got someone that's looking after the funds and releasing the funds, if they don't know how to, for example, release the SDA funding, it can take up to, weeks of back and forth with the NDIA to then get the SDA funding released. So it's not even just the NDIA that's slow. A plan manager may not know how to release the funding itself. So we, as SDA providers, we're constantly trying to improve the communications from not just us to the NDIA, but other stakeholders to the NDIA to speed up this process. There's a lot of pitfalls, as I keep mentioning, but definitely the payments getting released, every single scenario might be different.
Yeah. Did you give many big recommendations from your perspective to them as to how they should be improving?
I gave them a lot of recommendations. I'm not sure which ones they'll take on board and which ones they were, but obviously they're the safety, their concern is safety for this meeting. I'm not sure how much they'll address the undisapplied itself. I think their main sort of talk was, again, inducements, which I felt quite interesting because, offering to cover participants' white goods, in my opinion, is not an inducement. It's a need of typical participants when they move to a new house, things like that. So I don't know how far we got with the inducements sort of conversation. Yeah.
What about conflicts of interest in terms of people out there who are unregistered and or providers who are also developing SDA product or selling SDA product? Did you cover that at all or not?
Not quite. We did talk about the conflict of interest between SDA and SIL. So again, it is, we told them that it doesn't seem right to have, two registrations under one organization, because the whole reason SDA came about was to split accommodation and supports, to give the choice and control with the participant. So for example, if the participant is unhappy with their care provider, they don't have to move accommodation, because previously that was a big issue in this sector. So, they definitely agreed that was a bit of a danger. Like it can be dangerous to have, and, taken away from choice and control if an SDA and SIL is under one organization. But the other thing that was quite interesting as well is they didn't understand why it's very hard to get a couple of SIL providers under one roof. So obviously it's idealistic to think that, one SDA provider can have 3 SIL providers under one roof. Obviously the guidelines are written like that, but I was telling them it's impossible. With the way that funding works with support workers, it's very, very almost impossible to manage. So we stick away from those types of arrangements.
Cool. Well, before we finish, is there anything else we left out that you didn't talk about today that was covered in that meeting?
Not really. I think we touched on a lot of small general issues. Some of the dodgy practices that we were approached to undertake. So things like SIL providers giving us certain, incentives and whatnot. So we did uncover a fair few of those things with them, but no surprises, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah, gotcha. So where to from here? What's next between you and them? And nothing more to follow up on? Or is there something special to do?
Obviously, they gave us their contacts, and we might have, they wanted to interview one of our participants as well, to find out from a participant perspective, their thoughts, their experiences. So we will look to potentially organize that as well for them. And then we might, we're still waiting to collate, even from yourself, any sort of areas that you want to address, because we've got their direct contacts now. So we'll try and maintain a good relationship so we can see how we can improve this sector.
I reckon there should be a more public whistleblower hotline. So that if people are aware of, questionable activities in the NDIS market with respect to SDA, and they should be able to give a call to tell them about the story, because as we know with the Cocoon scandal, there was enough whistleblowing in the last 2-3 years there that they did nothing anyway with, So I hope that this is just not a PR campaign for them just to go and say, hey, we're out here to talk to you about what can be done, but really nothing actually happens anyway. We really do hope that the NDIA does really implement changes to make sure that the safety, as you say, safety is more a priority for participants and providers, that they're looked after. And I hope that with all the, not challenges in the NDIS at the moment, but public awareness, but also the NDIA being a Safeguards Commission is aware of certain, questionable activities from spruikers or SA providers who may not be, above board with the way they should be done. And they're being called out and they're being followed up by the NDIA, So I hope things are getting better moving forwards. And, and when there's bad press, obviously they have to, as a government department, have to go out there and do the right thing by beating the drum and saying, hey, we're here. How can we do more to help the community? Well, I hope that the feedback you guys give and other providers give to them about the SDA sector, it doesn't fall on deaf ears and actually is taken seriously, I guess. We can only hope so, that's all, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more on that one. So yeah, let's hope and see what changes, and we'll be here to update you if there's any sort of correspondence, and we'd be happy to share next time as well.
Yeah. So before we hang up, I want to ask you this question. How is business been the last 2 months? I know you guys were very, very busy, and then this has obviously a correlation to the Cocoon scandal and the negative press and activity in terms of, houses under construction or no financing being allowed out there. How is business for you as an SDA provider business?
I think it's been challenging, but very rewarding as well. So obviously, there's been a lot of movement in terms of participants, people in emergency scenarios in the last sort of 2 months. And for us, we've put in long hours to help them get in the right placements. And there's a lot of damage, investors, properties being enrolled and stuck with Cocoon, and then helping participants find the right place. So we've been very busy in the last 2 months. And then you can imagine that all the delays and, other sort of holdups on our end, but at the end of the day, we need safe environments for people that need housing desperately. And
have you transitioned any participants out of those Cocoon houses at all?
Yeah, of course. So we've transitioned a handful of them. I'm not sure where, the rest of them have gone, but the ones that have called out for help, we've always been there to sort of give them additional sort of option.
Were they brought to you by support coordinators?
Support coordinators, mostly support coordinators, yeah. Family members, some other school providers obviously receive from support coordinators, but yeah, so a range of different sources, yeah.
Have you heard any gossip out there about whether an organisation like Cocoon has withheld SDA income to investors by using it for other purposes in their business? Because that's what I hear, but I don't know for sure if that's true or not,
If there's another business I know there's another business that took on their sort of agreements.
No, I'm talking about Cocoon as the SDA provider purposely held back SDA funds that should have gone to an investor and used it for other business purposes internally.
I wouldn't be surprised, because they operated on a way where there was no clarity. When I talked to investors, there was no clarity on what the breakdown of income was. When did the participant move in? How much funding do they have? So it was very sort of, they were very vague when it came to communication.
I think, and by the way, I'm going to have an interview with the whistleblower of Cocoon, Tanya Lee Quinn, at the end of June or maybe early July. And she has all the financials. So she said they operate like a Ponzi scheme. Money go from here to there, back forth. I wouldn't be surprised. But now, you know what? It's closed up now. It is what it is. It's under liquidation, but I guess we'll never see the truth. But the whistleblower I have, I'll talk to as an interview in my podcast next few weeks. She'll be clarifying on more of that as well on the show.
All right.
Yeah. But listen, I really appreciate your time again. Really appreciate your feedback and your transparency on what you guys discussed with the NDIA. I mean, it's just general information anyway, nothing confidential. And hopefully we'll catch up with you some other time, hey?
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, glad to share. Thanks, guys. It's been
all good, man. See you later. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.